Welcome to the 15th episode of Shot Nostalgia, where we continue our drive back into the history of wrestling live from No Sale Studios. This is the ACEFIELD Tavern, ACEFIELD Retro. And as you can see, I'm Mr. Solo Dolo tonight, but I am joined by the great picture of Mike Belcaster. I got Dax Harwood. We got Cash Wheeler. We got some tequila in the house to get your Friday started. And we will give you all the Attitude Era goodness that you've been looking for. I appreciate you guys joining us here at Turnbuckle Tavern to enjoy your weekly shot of nostalgia. As we talked about last week, we are right in the mix of the autumn season, getting going, building towards Survivor Series 1998. That's the next real big event we're going to be reviewing, and that's the Deadly Games tournament where Rock is finally crowned as the champion. We're getting to see the emergence of some new main event stars there. Really, I mean, there's an embarrassment of riches on WWF side with Triple H, The Rock, obviously Stone Cold, Undertaker, Mick Foley. Go down the list, and we're seeing them emerge over time. Just the growth we've seen since the beginning of 1998. The difference in the product, how it emerges from 1997 to 1998, it's crazy. And then I think SummerSlam 1998, which was the episode last week, you can go back in the archives and check it out, whether on audio or on video, and check it out. I think it speaks to a lot of what the product became. And to compare the Royal Rumble 1998 to what it became in SummerSlam 1998, I don't know if there's a period of time where the product has changed as much. If you go and compare both of those shows, it's not really that long a period of time, but there's so much that changes, the roster shakeup, guys coming into their own and understanding the depth of the roster and realizing the valuable nature that a valuable mid-card can bring you, with the importance of the European Championship, the importance on the IC Championship. It speaks volumes about where they were going and building future stars. And it's amazing to me, like I said, and I keep repeating over and over again, that this is the same product as comparing with 1996. It's insane to see where the business was going. And this is one of the weeks that is important to talk about on the WWF side, because they're going to be challenged big time here because of the fact that they are being preempted and wrestling in a world where USA or Fox, they're paying a lot of money for the entertainment value of the WWE brand. That wasn't really the case here. And WWF is growing. And of course they are hotter than ever here, but they're still going to get preempted for live sports or even the Westminster Dog Show. And we had 2 out of 3 weeks that we're going to be reviewing here and getting in all the details that they were taped, preempted. And the crazy part is that they're being preempted for tennis, where obviously the US Open is the biggest tennis event of the year. It takes precedent over a lot of things as live sports, and contractual issues go into that, whether, they like it or not. They were always going to take a back seat. But the other part about this is when you have a 9 million and counting audience that's looking for professional wrestling, you gave WCW the leg up to potentially to crush the momentum that you had been creating over the course of the last 5 months. And does WCW take advantage of that? No. And we know that with the hindsight and the benefit of what we're able to look back in history and understand that WCW kind of dropped the ball here. And if you look at the results on the Nitro side, and we're not going to really do that, maybe we'll talk a little bit about it in the newsletter. But on WCW side, they have the opportunity to take WWF and kind of catch up. But even these 2 weeks of tape product where people can read the results, or they can even give the results away live on Nitro, it wasn't enough to catch WWF. And of course, they'll beat them in the ratings. The Saturday show will not do as good as a Monday Night Raw that's live, and that goes without saying. But here we're going to be reviewing the 3 Septembers, and we're leading into the fall. As I mentioned, the time is flying. We're almost 3/4 of the way through this season, believe it or not. And it's been an absolute blast. But the events are going to be reviewing today, the September 5th Raw, which is the first Raw since SummerSlam. Believe it or not, a full week, 6 days to be exact, have passed since SummerSlam 1998. We saw Austin retaining his championship. We saw Triple H becoming the new Intercontinental Champion. And this is the last time we'll see The Rock in a mid-card capacity in any way. He's about to have the rocket attached to him. And as I mentioned, Survivor Series 1998 will be his coronation officially, turning heel, winning the tournament, joining forces with Vince McMahon. And he never quite looks back. And to see the heights that he's reached, I mean, you could talk about it. We could do a whole podcast on Dwayne The Rock Johnson's career from 1996 debut in WWF to where he is now as the biggest celebrity in the world right now, actors and other things continued. He's a guy that is just, you would not even imagine. I mean, you could see the charisma here, but nobody would know the heights he would reach. And it starts here. So I'm looking forward to see the continued growth, especially losing the Intercontinental Championship throughout. He held that championship for a long time. Won it at the end of 1997. Held on to it, really established the title back in a good way. And, the great feud with Ken Shamrock, that feud with Triple H, it's pivotal. and everybody wants to talk about the Austin Rock feud, but the Triple H and Rock stuff really is essential to both of their character developments. And to watch them and what they did at SummerSlam 1998 was the culmination of that first mid-card feud, but we'll see them again having feuds over the WWF Championship and that famous Iron Man match. And, so many countless memories between the both of them on both sides of the fence, Rock being heel, Triple H being face, and vice versa. So it's going to be interesting to see as they grow. And I'm sure we're going to see more growth as time goes on. Triple H, unfortunately, is sidelined with an injury following SummerSlam 1998. And that kind of puts a little bit of a damper, but they're following the Stone Cold and the, other formulas where they keep a guy on TV despite being hurt, and it helps character development. I think that was the same with Triple H. But, like I said, each week we'll go through 3 events in 1998. We usually do 3 Raws and a pay-per-view. It's been staggered that way. Sometimes 3 Raws. We got you covered with all the results and everything going between it. I'll review the matches. And, I just freshly watched them, enjoyed the shows, and they've been a real treat to watch. That's the biggest thing I'm pulling away from WWF 1998. Every season has some difficult watches, and there have been some in 1998. We're not going to pretend there haven't been. But this more than ever, especially the past maybe 6 episodes covering WWF 1998, there's been a lot of good content where they're just getting hit after hit when you're watching the show, and you see how they start the show, the middle of the show, and there's some garbage in there. Of course, we talk about the oddities, and sometimes the Kai and Tai matches don't feel as important as the other stuff happening. But when you see how compact a lot of the importance of the memorable events are on the same shows sometimes, where you get 3 memorable moments that kind of flash back in your brain, you see a compilation package on YouTube and take a look at it, there is a lot to be said. Like, damn, this was all in the same last 3 weeks of Raw, sometimes in the same Raw. And it's been amazing to watch that happening in real time. And a lot of it ages really, really well. And we were skeptical in the beginning. I know Mike Belcaster and I were talking on the side and also talking on air just about how maybe we're in for kind of a rude awakening, and we're going to have to sit here and sludge through 1998. And maybe it's not as good as we remember, but it's every bit as advertised. And I know once you get past the fact that work rate does not matter in the Attitude Era, then it becomes very enjoyable. And when those good matches happen, like we mentioned, Triple H and Taker, also, Rock and Triple H in the ladder match, Austin and Taker in the main event. I go back to Dude Love versus Austin for the WWF Championship at Unforgiven. There's some really good gems that they fit into the style, and sometimes they stand out a little bit more. And you can make the argument that there's a lot to be said where 2023, 2022, we're living in an era of a golden age of match quality. You go week to week, and a lot of times on any given Dynamite, you'd have a match that would be match of the last 10 years around this era. Maybe something to be said about having great matches sporadically placed on pay-per-view where they're more memorable. And that's a conversation for another time, but definitely interesting to talk about. But we're going to get into the happy hour. We have 2 newsletters to review. Not a lot going on in the newsletter, but definitely important to build context of what's happening in September of 1998.
Happy hour.
All right, the September 7th, 1998 newsletter, and we start with Ric Flair. There's been conversation. We've been talking about it week to week. Where is Ric Flair going? Is he going to leave WCW, the pastures that he knows, for some greener pastures in WWF? Will he decide to go over to the WWF side? And we've heard other people chime in about this. Most notably, the guy who signs the checks, Vince McMahon, has been very, very positive about potentially bringing Flair, and he's been very complimentary. But we're going to talk about him here in the newsletter because he's fresh off of that lawsuit. He's at legal odds with Eric Bischoff and WCW, and this has been going on since early April. We know, if you go back to the reason why the lawsuit has taken hold, is missing a Thunder taping, location being Tallahassee, Florida. He was supposed to be doing this new Horseman bit, but he apparently had said that he told them about Reed Flair's wrestling match that he had in his high school, where he was going to accompany him for the National Age Group Wrestling Championship in Pontiac, Michigan. Eric Bischoff was upset about this. He said he had a meeting with the wrestlers on 4/13 where he was running down Flair's character. He was calling him a swerve and bullshit artist, claimed he was going to sue him into bankruptcy. Bischoff alienated a lot of the locker room with this because he came across very strongly that a large percentage of the WCW wrestlers believed that this was a work. And don't forget, as we covered in WCW 1996, this is not something that Bischoff would be completely against. We saw that with the Bischoff, with the Brian Pillman stuff, where they were working the boys in the back. So potentially this could have been a work, but we all know now that it's not. WCW did file a $2 million lawsuit against Flair for no showing 4 house shows dates and disrupting what they had said WCW's planned storylines to reintroduce the 4 Horsemen. They claimed that financially they were damaged from this. They wanted to recoup them from Ric Flair. Ric Flair later filed motions in both Charlotte and Atlanta to have his agreement, which was not a contract, but a signed intent paper outlining Flair's pay through early 2001, where he would earn $725,000 in 1998 and 1999 with a maximum of 220 working days and 500,000 in 2000 with a lower number of working days. All being said, lawsuit's not settled yet. At this press time, they have not come to an agreement, but we have to figure out when is Flair getting back in the ring. So Meltzer continues, since leaving WCW largely over the impasse over the Tallahassee and a frustration with how his character is being used, Flair had been interested in going to WWF and working a program against who else? Steve Austin. Well, McMahon has publicly talked about loving to have Flair. The WWF has not made a major effort to pursue Flair. They continue about Flair's hesitancy to go back to WCW. And it's amazing, too, that he even considered it in the first place. We know how popular he is in that area where they run North Carolina. That's Flair country. But he hasn't been pushed like a top star. And it's so interesting to me because we talk about overcoming adversity and relationships in wrestling, most notably the CM Punk situation. We're going to see potentially him coming back very soon, potentially about a month and change with the Collision show in Chicago. But there's precedent set that people can overcome. Sometimes they can overcome a $2 million lawsuit and get back into business together if it makes sense. So fistfights, lawsuits, anything else in wrestling, people eventually make it work. And Flair, eventually, we all know he decides to stay with WCW. He'll be back in WCW for the time being. He'll be part of the last main event ever on Nitro before they went out of business. And eventually Vince did purchase WCW. And we'll see Ric Flair a few short years from this point, 4 years to be exact, or 4 years, just about, where he'll be coming back into Raw as an authority figure. And then we're going to see him in action at WrestleMania, taking on Taker. And then we get to see that whole secondary run of Ric Flair. But at this point, it was a real possibility that we would have Ric Flair in the WWF taking on Steve Austin, which kind of has a whole bunch of what ifs. And I know we had Austin eventually when he came back and a active Ric Flair. But in 1998, I think, 4 years is a long time, especially with Ric Flair being 49 years old. Difference between 49 and 54 or 53 years old is a big difference, especially with all the miles on Flair's body. Maybe we could have got a main program in 1998 or even 1999 with Ric Flair and Stone Cold. And what would be the draw of that? Would people have a big interest in it? I personally would. I think it would have drawn, but it depends on how Flair was presented. We know how Flair continued to be presented in WCW, and it definitely was not as a top guy. And they made their choices, and whether it be vendettas against Ric Flair or for whatever reason they didn't see him like that because he was part of the old guard, I think presented as the man, the guy, the top of the guy, the real world's champion, that Ric Flair could have drawn money on pay-per-view. And I like to think about Austin in he was banged up, obviously, in 1998 with coming off the neck injury in 97 and with the knees, but I think they could have had a really good program. And we talked about Brawl for All not having Steve Williams anymore as the top guy in the fall. Who's going to challenge Austin for the championship? They need a top guy. And of course, they could figure out a different guy. They can go back to Taker again. They can go Kane. They can go Foley. We know they eventually go the Rock's route, Vince McMahon. But throwing Ric Flair in there certainly has me intrigued. And I'm just a Ric Flair fan. I think it'd be interesting to see the both of them take it on pay-per-view. And WrestleMania level main event, these are two of the biggest stars in wrestling in history. It definitely could have been something, kind of a missed opportunity. But we have them going unopposed. We talked about Nitro in the beginning of the intro here. Talked about Nitro going unopposed with Raw being taped. And everyone's talking about pro wrestling interest, and Meltzer said, is so high that WCW would set record ratings on A31 with Raw preempted due to the US Open, and even putting on atrocious TV, which saw, even unopposed, the audience drop during the third hour. It wasn't enough to prevent all-time records from being smashed. So Meltzer continues, realistically, had the show been even average, the rating overall would probably have been in the mid-sixes, as it already reached the 6-8 level by the end of the second hour, and wrestling shows by tradition usually grow into the finish. However, because of the nearly unwatchable nature of the second hour and much of the third, the rating was hurt a little. The general rule has been one wrestling show gets preempted, the remaining show usually draws 62% of the total pro wrestling audience from the previous week, which in this case would be a 603 rating, and exactly what the show did. The replay, which aired from 2:07 to 5:15 a.m., drew a 0.3 rating. That's like Rampage ratings. They even in the middle of the morning, they're drawing bigger ratings than Rampage. It just shows, not to take a cheap shot at Rampage, but kind of had to there looking at the 0.3. But Meltzer continues, due to going unopposed, as it turns out, the show contained 5 of the 10 most watched matches ever on cable. And none were matches you'd expect, since the lack of competition eliminated the usual channel surfing that goes on Monday nights. So if you look at that point, the most watched matches in the history of wrestling, the list was being overtaken from a week-to-week basis. And especially when we mentioned there's a huge crop of wrestling fans that exist. Monday night's becoming it's convenient to sit down and watch TV, and there wasn't as many streaming options and blah, blah, blah. YouTube, Hulu, Netflix didn't exist. You were kind of a slave to the cable and what they offered you. Wrestling fans were conditioned to want wrestling on Monday nights, and Raw wasn't there. So what does that mean? You switch over to TNT, there's Nitro, and they endured what they could. Meltzer says it's nearly unwatchable. That's up for debate. 1998 WCW, some have their fans. People are very critical of the product, but there's some people that really enjoy 1998 WCW. That is, again, up for debate. You can decide that, but they were breaking huge numbers here, and he breaks down the matches that broke all these records. I mean, we had Lodi and Saturn versus High Voltage became the second most watched pro wrestling match ever on cable in 5,035,000 homes. So the only match that surpassed it at this point, 1998, and again, I'd have to go through and figure out if that has ever been topped, was Hogan and Bill Goldberg earlier this year on 7/6. So he goes through the other matches, says how many people are watching, but some of these matches, I mean, you look, there's 4 million, close to 5. We had Hogan and Robin, Page and Malone with 4,789,000 homes. It's absolutely insane to how many people are watching wrestling. And it also kind of speaks to the dropped opportunity on WCW side, where Meltzer says it here. If they would have gone out of their way to maybe stack a card similar to what they did for the Georgia Dome shows, and I'm not sure how far in advance they knew they were getting preempted for the US Open, but I do know the US Open is same time every year. If you had someone that was in the front office and said, let's stack this card to go above and beyond, because this is your chance to shine. You didn't have anyone on the other side kind of holding you back and saying, we're going to skip back and forth. We're going to go. But like, if they would have went out there and put on a dream match card, similar to what they were doing for some nights where you talked about the 7/6 Goldberg versus Hogan match at the Georgia Dome, maybe they would have hooked people that would come back the next week and not go back to WWF. But maybe at the same time, they were just happy to be there and they knew they would draw the ratings, so they'd save it for a week they have to fight. It's two different mindsets, but I would certainly look at this as a missed opportunity where you could have said, you know what? Let's put our best effort out there. Let's figure out a way to hook people and understand that while WWF's audience is watching, let's show them what they're missing if they're not watching us. But they took the other approach where they said, let's punt. Let's go fight another day. Let's go to next week and give them a better effort when we go head to head, which to me is baffling, but I digress. So we're going with more rumors backstage about Triple H and China getting engaged in November. And Triple H has denied to friends that they are engaged, that they're going to be getting married, although the two of them have been dating. It's a well-known fact that they were dating at the time. We know that they don't get married. We know Paul Levesque's trajectory of who he will marry. It's not China, but it's interesting to see how their personal life is sort of blending on screen, and interesting to see it here. We had Owen Hart not at the tapings because of the injury during a Shamrock match. We also have Mankind not being there, and they're working in injury. So we also have more stars of the WWF camp. We talk about that all the time. I most noted the guys in this camp: Jay Rizzo, who we know is Christian Cage; Andrew Martin, who we know is Test; and Kurt Angle. So Kurt Angle is starting to pop up here all over the newsletter. We talked about him last week being a standout. We've heard guys talk about Kurt Angle, just how quickly he got the wrestling skills under his belt, where it just came to him naturally. And I think Bruce Pritchard said he's the guy who probably got it the quickest as an outsider. Maybe Brock Lesnar being a close second, but we had these camps being held that were very useful. This is pre-performance center, and this is the way they were molding their talent. And it speaks volumes about some of these guys are in camps from, weeks prior, and then we see them having meaningful roles on the television screen only weeks later. So the transition, similar to now, we watch all these guys get cultivated in NXT and molded, and they're working on their mic skills. From the time that Dory Funk opens the door for a training camp, it's about 6 weeks until they get there, which is absolutely insane to even think about, where, the transition and the percentage of guys that go on to be decent level stars. I mean, of course, Kurt Angle, we know what he did, but even a guy like Christian, who eventually was a world champion; Test, who was an Intercontinental champion. We also mentioned other guys throughout, Steve Blackman, Val Venus, Edge, guys that were all in these camps. Whoever was running Dory Funk, we know was running the camps, but whoever's finding the talent to invite them to the camp, they were doing a great job as well. We also have more on that Spanish language show on Univision. That was a huge piece too. They did a press conference. They thought this would be huge, but apparently it won't be debuting next week, and there's no planned debut date. They pushed it back. So that was something that never happened. Belcaster and I were talking about maybe having the valuable nature of the Lucha Libre and trying to corner that market. They never quite got it down. And we also talked about, back in 1996, they brought in a lot of the AAA talent, CMLL. They tried their hand at bringing them in the Rumble. It just always falls flat. The international flair in these times, like it has a short burst of time where they try to bring these guys in, and they never put the meaningful booking behind it. And the same thing's happening here. They see a need in that market, that there's a demographic that loves professional wrestling and they want to cater to it, but they can't figure out a way to make it work. And that's still to this day. Like I know they're as international as ever, but they're always searching for that Spanish speaking star that can take him to the next level. And that's why Alberto Del Rio got such a huge push when he first came in. They were always looking, and baffles the mind while Andrade wasn't pushed to the moon in WWE. So we had Triple H talking about Ric Flair, and interesting because they are closest than ever. And they're, if you think about guys that are, behind the scenes, very close friends. Triple H was on a radio interview, and he said that Ric Flair was too old and should retire. So we know Triple H was a huge influence on Ric Flair getting his confidence back when he came over in 2002 and 2003 when they started Evolution, and Triple H understands the importance of Ric Flair's legacy. It's interesting to see that little anecdote note here, where obviously Flair wasn't mad about it. They're still friends, but interesting to see. And I'd love to check out that radio interview. We had Jim Ross being apologetic about his previous comments regarding Tony Schiavone. Jim Ross continued saying he doesn't believe Schiavone has a malicious bone in his body. He has a wonderful family, and basically that whatever he said, is what he's told to say, as is the case as all wrestling announcers. So he walked back the criticism of everything going on with Tony Schiavone. Jim Ross was very critical of everything they were saying, especially giving away results. And Tony Schiavone didn't ever shoot back at him. I know that we've seen Tony Schiavone do the butts and seats thing with Mick Foley, which will be sometime next year, which we won't get to cover. But Tony Schiavone is probably most recognized for that quote, but he was apparently told to say it. So Jim Ross understanding that they just have jobs to do. So Jim Ross did have an interesting quote here, and Meltzer says, he said people running the wrestling company should stop acting like ninth graders and leave that to the talent. Meltzer says, it is funny when you read things like McMahon's AOL chats and think if CEOs of real companies were to say that, they'd be laughing stocks within their industry. Interesting enough, Vince McMahon continues to lead by example in many ways, but we have a school board in Jonesboro, Arkansas. They're leery because of the problems with violence stemming from there's some shootings going on in schools and fights happening in school, and they're blaming pro wrestling. So they banned pro wrestling shirts from schools in the area because of hostile messages on some of them. And some of the audience in here, I can speak to it as well. Elementary school, junior high, there are some shirts you just weren't allowed to wear. They make you turn it inside out because of the relation with pro wrestling. And even if it didn't have a curse word on it or a middle finger or suck it or whatever, it didn't matter. The association with a wrestling shirt became negative connotation and you weren't even allowed to wear it. So that happened in real time, 1998 in elementary school. A 9-year-old ACEFIELD Retro had to deal with that as well. So I'm curious if you guys have any experience with that. I'm sure Belcaster can speak to it as well, wearing wrestling shirts and being targeted in that way where have to turn them inside out and they're assuming that Austin 316 on the shirt or a skull on Austin's face had to turn it inside out. It speaks to where wrestling eventually jumped to. We have more information here about Steve Austin going on Regis and Kathy Lee on August 31st. He's going to be mainly plugging the new WWF CD, and WCW is also coming out with an entrance music CD, which is really awesome to see. I love this, and this was huge for my Fig Fed, being able to have these theme songs, because I mentioned this on a previous episode of Shot Nostalgia, but I still distinctly remember when the Corporation theme first happened, and it was obviously the No Chance in Hell, the Royal Rumble 1999 theme song. Eventually, the Corporation, Vince McMahon, it became his theme song forever, but that it originally was a pay-per-view theme song. They didn't have a theme song for the Corporation, so they just inherited that theme, and I wanted it so bad, especially when that Paul White figure first came out in 99 during WrestleMania. I was with my Fig Fed, and I remember with a cassette on my boombox, I would hold it close to the speaker on the TV, and I would hit record, and I would use the tape, commentary and all on it, as my entrance music for any of the Corporation, whether it be Ken Shamrock or Test or Big Show or Vince McMahon. I would hit that music and they would come out. And when that came out on the wrestling, when it came out on the wrestling CDs, WWF Volume 4, Volume 3, Volume 4 is where No Chance in Hell was on it. That was amazing to me. And then not to mention Volume 3 had X-Pac's theme, Taker's theme, Dude Love's theme. And then Volume 4 had Triple H's theme song and The Rock's theme song. And then eventually, I think years later, they came out with the anthology stuff with all of the theme songs. Obviously, it's all obsolete now with Spotify and streaming, but just speaks to where it was. And the theme songs are so important to wrestling. We talk about this all the time, how important music is to wrestling. And to me, that's what WWF always had over WCW in this era, was memorable music. I was watching a match between Macho Man Randy Savage and Sting. I think it was at a Spring Stampede. I think it was 1999, 1998, where Sting's coming out and his music, and WCW fans probably going to not like this comment, but Sting's theme song in WCW, not great to me. Even Randy Savage's theme song in WCW, not great. And I think every person on WWF side had such a memorable theme song. Go from Ken Shamrock to Mick Foley, Val Venus. It was so, you heard the first notes of their theme song and you recognize who they were. The same can't be said for WCW. Maybe WCW fans can correct me. Too bad they're WCW guys. Maybe they can speak to their theme songs even better. But I still believe I'd take Jim Johnson over Jimmy Hart any day as far as theme songs. And I would take CFO as well. Some of those theme songs even today, how memorable are they on the WWE side? And AEW has some memorable theme songs. They buy the rights to the music and they're doing a better job of that. Much better than WCW did. But for me, there's nothing that will top Attitude Era versions of these theme songs that were just epic. But let's get to the August 14th, 1998 newsletter. We continue with the Ric Flair situation. He's apparently coming back 9/14 in Greenville, South Carolina. There's a decision up there where he's going to be doing it, but they may bring him back at the Winston-Salem pay-per-view show. Flair has not dropped his lawsuit against WCW, nor has WCW dropped their lawsuit against him. Meltzer says theoretically Flair could work for WCW, get a ruling in his favor, and immediately be a free agent and go to WWF. Although he says, I believe that is more theoretical legally than a possibility of something that is going to happen. Meltzer continues, WWF sources claim the company was very interested, but due to the question of tampering, particularly with its own lawsuit out against WCW, the idea of specifically laying out scenarios and offering contracts to wrestlers under contract to the opposition wasn't done. obviously referencing the Scott Hall, Kevin Nash lawsuit that's still not there. We also have comments about Ric Flair on the WWF side. Meltzer mentions the Undertaker critical comments they had about Ric Flair being too old and washed up. Triple H regarding him being too old. Triple H he was a rising star. He had a huge say in things that were going on. And we also had, the amount of money that's being offered. I think at this point, it's becoming Ric Flair recognizes WCW is his home. That plays a part in contract negotiations. And sometimes that does play a part, especially if you compare it to sports guys that have been part of the fabric of a franchise, WCW being that franchise. Ric Flair is that guy. He always held out hope that he would continue to be that guy, continuing for them, and maybe he'll be pushed as the top guy. Eric Bischoff will look past it. We know what happens, but he was the ultimate optimist, thinking would work out, and it just shows. Flair and Bischoff put their differences together. They were able to get it back in the ring. Ric Flair came back to WCW after all this happened, while the lawsuit was still going on. So anyone that wants to talk about Punk and Tony Khan and the Elite not being able to make it work, this is an example that it can work. And of course, different personalities. Is Ric Flair and CM Punk are two different people. That's not, you can't say that one would do the same as others, but a $2 million active lawsuit on both sides it's insane. We talk about the fact that there's no lawsuit pending on either side of the Elite or Punk. Can you imagine if there was a lawsuit involved in this where that would be kind of also in the way of just the personality differences? We talk about they're not allowed to even talk about any of the stuff that happened at Brawl Out because of the lawsuit potentially, or maybe the settlement outside that they agreed not to sue each other if no one speaks about the details. Point being is Ric Flair and Bischoff absolutely despise each other. WCW and Ric Flair are on opposite sides of the fence of a litigation over $2 million, and they still were able to make it work. So use this as an example. Just one of many examples, by the way, of getting back in a room and being adults and doing business for professional wrestling. We have WWF receiving 10,000 calls and grossed about $250,000 in merchandise sales, about half of which were Steve Austin merchandise, the hour after SummerSlam on the Home Shopping Network. So I was listening to the SummerSlam episode of Something to Wrestle, and Bruce Pritchard was asked about the Home Shopping Network, and there were some lead-ins here. I think there was an employee that had a relationship or came from the Home Shopping Network. I remember this so fondly after pay-per-views where you turn it on. And a lot of times I wasn't watching the pay-per-views live. So I'd wait for this, and then I would ogle at all the merchandise that I would inevitably not get from my parents because I wouldn't have the guts to ask them to buy it for me. But the Home Shopping Network would have these blankets and t-shirts and stuffed animals and Beanie Babies. And it was just so fun to watch. Endless. I think it was about, they said it was an hour or 2 hours of just sales, and to receive 10,000 calls of merchandise following event, and half of those calls and merchandise sales were from Steve Austin, just speaks to wrestling being so popular. And it was a good thing for both sides. You had, WWF being able to profit from maybe the established Home Shopping Network audience, and Home Shopping Network was a no-brainer. Maybe people would come back and understand, I bought something here once, maybe I'll come back and check out the other stuff that they have. So kind of cool. Wouldn't work today. I know Home Shopping Network does exist, but with online shopping, not the same. But this was the way. It was the same thing as online shopping. You go down and start, impulse buying things that you can see. This was you're into the product, you're watching wrestling, and you see some cool stuff. I need to buy that DX blanket. I need to have it. I need to buy that Stone Cold blanket. I'm sure there's YouTube clips of it or whatever on Home Shopping Network, but it used to be awesome. If you missed it, you missed a very good time. We also had WWF producing a very limited quantity, and this was with the official WWF logo on it. And this is so out of character for them. Said the shirts that said Austin rules, Goldberg sucks. They were selling exclusively at malls, and this was confirmed to be an official WWF licensed product. I have yet to see this shirt. I'm sure there's pictures of them out there. But just out of their playbook, even mentioning a rival company's top star on their merchandise, so out of the ordinary for them. Limited quantity of the shirts, but if you have an Austin Rules Goldberg sucks shirt, I'm sure it's worth a lot of money. But so interesting to see that they kind of knew it was off brand of them, so they weren't going to offer it on the WWF shop or even on the Home Shopping Network. They were selling it exclusively in malls, where we do know, like, by me. The Atias Flea Market used to create these bootleg wrestling shirts, which were epic. They were so awesome. They were screen printing them there, and that was everything, because getting stuff off the WWF shop was not easy. You got to order through the magazine, and going to the flea market, it was there, tangible, hanging on the wall. You can buy it $20 or whatever it costs, $15 for a D'Lo Brown shirt, screen printed, homemade right there for you. You rock it to school the next day. Absolutely epic. I remember there was a Stone Cold shirt I got from there, not licensed, whatever, probably bootleg, being made in the Atias Flea Market. It was a Stone Cold shirt. He had the earring, and I think it said 100% pure on his forehead. I don't know if you guys remember that shirt. Obviously referencing 100% pure whoop ass, but fond memories. But let's continue with publicity angle happening on the Regis and Kelly show. And Meltzer says they did an angle where Austin gave Regis Philbin a stunner on A31 on the TV show, and Regis came back from the commercial with his face all taped up, claiming he had broken his nose. Regis had claimed years ago to suffer a broken finger back in LA, early 60s, with Freddie Blassie. Austin suffered a dislocated jaw when he collided with Undertaker early in their match, and also bit a chunk of his tongue off. Undertaker underwent back spasms early in the match and as well, and both gutted out, which is a very good match anyway. So he's all over the place here. He apparently stunned Regis Philbin on the show, which I don't know how you didn't mention that in the first place, because it's the second newsletter, so waited a week to get there. Maybe Meltzer didn't watch it. But we also saw, I think, Austin was knocked out in the match at SummerSlam, and Belcaster and I talked about it last week, where they hit heads, and we now know he has a dislocated jaw, and he was unconscious for half the match and had to walk his way through it. And then obviously Taker's back was hurt, but despite all that match was very, very good. We had Triple H getting a second MRI done this past week. He was given the week off of house shows, but the knee at this point won't require surgery, just rest. And we have Kurt Angle signing a multi-year contract with the WWF. His next work will be at the September training camp. He's not far from debuting here. We're going to see him soon, and he's going to be off to the races, winning title after title. He's going to be world champion by this point very soon, maybe a year and a couple months on top of it. European champion, IC champion. They give it all to him in his first year. So 1999 is the year of Kurt Angle. So we're going to be seeing him very active very soon. And we talked about how quickly he understood how to be a professional wrestler, and Kurt Angle was a natural at it. I very much enjoyed his career, and he was a pivotal part about creating new stars. And it all started again here. Kurt Angle tried his best at doing these camps, and he was a natural athlete, obviously Olympic level wrestler, and was able to get in the ring and be a top guy. They were just churning out top guys that were over organically every single time they tried, and absolutely amazing to watch. We continue here. Dan Severn was complaining to Jim Ross about not being allowed to bring his NWA and UFC title belts to the ring or be acknowledged as NWA champion, and we're told the decision may be changed. As you remember, when they did the NWA invasion angle earlier this year, they dropped it because of how bad it was, and it was as bad as anyone talks about. It's horrible. Dan Severn, legit tough guy. He's involved in the UFC early years. Never really translated on screen. Never had a reaction from the fans, but legitimate tough guy. Paved the way for guys like Brock Lesnar, UFC guys, Matt Riddle, guys like that. It just shows that style. Maybe wrestling fans weren't quite ready for it, but a guy like Dan Severn might have resonated with the audience maybe a few years later. He just was a little bit ahead of his time. Ken Shamrock, same thing. I think Ken Shamrock could have been the biggest star in wrestling if maybe it was a couple years later. I just don't think UFC was as popular in culture as it is now, and that's an understatement. But that's a big piece to why Dan Severn didn't get over, and I think UFC in a bigger light. If a guy comes over from UFC, they already have stock in their name. And there's a big difference between Conor McGregor and Dan Severn, but they're both people that have held UFC championship belts in their career. But as far as popularity goes, ask any UFC fan that's not, a diehard who Dan Severn was, and they probably just know him as a guy who was champion early in the company's history. He's not known as favorably as probably a lot of guys that are recent. And that just speaks to the popularity of UFC and what they did with Endeavor taking over and Dana White. We have Steve Williams out until November. This is all due to injuries happening in the Brawl for All. And Steve Regal aka William Regal, will be brought back to September WWF training camp to work on his physique and conditioning. They want to tighten up his upper body, apparently. So we're going to see Steve Regal, the real man's man gimmick, coming in here. He'll get a couple runs in WWE, WWF. He's going to be a big part of the mid-card, IC champion. William Regal, absolutely epic. He had great matches when we covered in WCW 1996. We have Vince McMahon on an AOL chat. He was answering some Q&A for fans on Instant Messenger. He hinted WWF may be back on a network slot. Meltzer says there's nothing close to imminent, and there have been a lot of questions based on the strong cable ratings. But the most likely scenario would be something on Fox. And Fox is also still very much talking about starting its own wrestling company in the future. So interesting to see here in 1998. We know that Fox finally gets SmackDown after so many years. I forget what year it was. I think it was like 2020, 2019, where they became the proud owners of the SmackDown brand. But they were always flirting with getting a WWE, WWF branded show. And even back here in 1998, Fox was up and coming. Of course, they were trying to take on the NFL, MLB, NASCAR. They're trying to find ways to get into live entertainment, and they were tapping into it. And wrestling was a big part of it. And that was even early on in 1998. It would take a while for them to eventually get into a long-term relationship, Fox and WWE, that is. But they eventually do. And we saw that they were courting each other all the way back in 1998. Fascinating. And the last thing here, we have Vader dropping weight from high 370 to about 345. And the company wants him to weigh 325 pounds, figuring less weight will make it easier on his knees. And we have other guys they're talking about here as far as weight loss. Meltzer says Taker dropped 330 to 315. And they want Mark Henry to drop from 385 to 340. This way he has a better physique and be more mobile. We saw Mark Henry, Big Show, those guys had a short period of time where they were being sent back down to OVW when it eventually happened again, because Mark Henry has a long contract here. They signed him after being an Olympic lifter. He's locked in. And we're going to see Mark Henry make the best of it, but Mark Henry is a promising young talent here, and eventually he has to find his way, and weight becomes a big issue for a lot of these guys, and they want them to drop it for their health, but also for their mobility and for presentation, because this is a business, as we all know. But let's get into getting fixed here, and we're going to be talking about the September 5th, 1998 Raw from Saturday night from the New Haven, Connecticut Coliseum.
Get your fix.
All right, time to get our fix. WWF Raw from Saturday night, September 5th, 1998 from New Haven, Connecticut. The New Haven Coliseum. Our current champs are as followed. The WWF champion, Steve Austin, won it back on 6/29, 1998. The IC champion is Triple H. He won it back on 8/30, 1998. Our tag champs, the New Age Outlaws, they won it back on 8/30, 1998. The European champion is D'Lo Brown. And the light heavyweight champion is Taka Michinoku. D'Lo won it back on July 20th. Taka won it back all the way in December of 1997. So this is the first episode of Raw following SummerSlam. So all these things that went down here, Triple H, as we know, won at SummerSlam. New Age Outlaws won the titles at SummerSlam. If you're a wrestling fan, you had to wait 6 days to check this product out. That's a long period of time, especially in wrestling terms. You have to wait a very long time to check out what's happening on the other side. There's tennis going on Monday night, so we're here Saturday night. We get some still shots opening the show of Steve Austin and Taker wrestling. Remember the old still shots they show from WWF Magazine? They didn't want to show the highlights because you could still buy the replay, guys. So we get the intro with Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, and Vince McMahon begins the show coming out to the ring. He wants to explain to the audience that there will be an emotional and physical breakdown at Breakdown in Your House pay-per-view, which will be September 27th. We'll cover it next week here on Shot Nostalgia, episode 16. He's targeting Stone Cold. Vince has had it. He wants the championship belt off of him. And he says it's a good thing they named the champion the pay-per-view Breakdown. McMahon then says, after September 27th, Austin will no longer be champion, and that's a guarantee. He talks about Taker sending Kane back to the locker room during the match. And then the next day, Austin went on Regis and Kathy Lee, which they showed. And then Vince calls out Taker and calls Kane some disparaging names that we can't repeat here. It's edited out on Peacock, but we have the original transcript. So use your imagination what Vince calls him. Vince, the uncancelable person, doesn't matter what people say about it, but this was a different time, of course. Vince thinks Taker and Kane should be dominating WWF, but instead the WWF superstars they're making a mockery of them. They don't respect you guys. He calls them both pussies and claims Undertaker and Kane, they have nothing left. They both get together and they rally, even though they don't get along very well. They chase Vince out. So I want to correct. They did. He said, and I quote, putrid pussies. That's what he calls Kane and Taker. So Vince on fire at this point. We have our opening match here, and it is a tag match. We have 8-Ball and Skull with Paul Ellering in their corner. Shout out to Paul Ellering in the chat. Taking on Ken Shamrock and Steve Blackman. Match is quick, 2 minutes long, ends in a no contest. This is just storyline advancement. Before the match, they were taking us back to when Shamrock and Blackman were wrestling outside the ring and inside the ring. Jim Ross considers they have probably mended the fence, that they're back together. So this match here is, again, short, but we have Kane and Taker interrupting it before we even get started. Blackman is right in the crosshairs of damage here. DOA beat up Shamrock on the floor, but Taker applies a knee bar while Kane puts boots to Steve Blackman. Vince McMahon obviously riled them up, and now they're going to be beating up the whole roster because now in their mind, the roster doesn't respect us. We're going to make them respect us. But here we are where, unfortunately, Steve Blackman is on the receiving end of an ass whooping. So we have more Val Venus in the back. Little segment here. And we have the clip of the New Age Outlaws regaining the championship belts. And Jim Ross reiterates on commentary, we may never see Mankind again after everything that happened. And we go into the next match here. Val Venus and Vader. We mentioned Vader in the newsletter just 2 seconds ago that he needs to lose weight. This match is a no contest again because same thing happened again where they go 3 minutes and 30 seconds. They go back and forth. Val Venus and Vader exchanging holds here. We had Vader hitting a splash from the middle rope for a 2 count. Bradshaw shows up, goes after Vader, and then Taker and Kane also show up, just like they did in the first match. Bradshaw gets the hell out of there, and we have Taker and Kane beating the shit out of Val Venus and Vader. Kane hits Val Venus with a chokeslam, and Vader gets a double chokeslam from the both of them. This is the last we'll see of Vader for now. He's going to go over to All Japan, be more appreciated over there. But maybe it puts a little bookmark into the Vader era here in WWF. But this is the story they're weaving through. Kane and Taker are taking on the whole roster. So we're going to continue to see where it goes. Obviously, they are stronger together as a team. And Vince wants them as a team because he wants the title off of them. And even though he doesn't really want them running roughshod over the roster and it puts him in danger, he'd rather have them as champion, which speaks to the absolute hatred he has for Stone Cold Steve Austin. We have a backstage segment with Michael Cole. The Rock and Mark Henry are talking about the New Age Outlaws. Rock is obviously on the mic doing the heavy lifting. And pretty much Rock says there's not much to say about Triple H other than The Rock may not be the Intercontinental Champion anymore, but I'll always be the People's Champion. Like I said, this is the last time we'll see him with the IC title at SummerSlam. He's now moving on to bigger and better things. And the bigger and better things are going to be Survivor Series 1998 Deadly Games, where he is going to get the chance of a lifetime, turning heel, becoming the corporate champion. And so much is going to change from September until November. I'm curious to see what track they put The Rock on to plant the seeds that this is happening. Because at this moment, yes, he seems like a future main eventer. Yes, he seems like someone who could potentially do it in the future. But if you would have told someone in September of 1998 that Rock would be champion 2 months later, I don't think anyone would have believed you, especially with how they were presenting people. And the jump from the IC title to the world title still was a very large jump. So we go with the next match here. The aforementioned Rock and Mark Henry. They're the Nation taking on the New Age Outlaws, who just won the tag titles. They're putting the tag titles on the line. So Road Dogg and Billy Gunn have China in their corner. Match ends in DQ, 7 minutes long. Match is pretty good. Again, we have China getting involved, jumping Mark Henry at the end for a disqualification. But match had some good momentum going for a bit here. Obvious shenanigans at all times with the normal stuff with the Outlaws and DX and stuff going on the outside of the ring. But this was a pretty fun match with some talented guys. The New Age Outlaws are holding China back while Rock and Mark Henry are going to the locker room. And we also get a little bit of the sexual chocolate vibes from Mark Henry, where he started to show a little bit of that side of him. And we definitely have seen that over the course of the last few weeks. We saw the emergence of Kama become the Godfather. He's coming up with the ladies. Rock is pivoting towards being the people's champion. D'Lo Brown, of course, is doing the European Championship thing, wearing the vest and the chest protector. And Mark Henry is becoming more of that gimmick where he's going to be sexual chocolate. Every one of those guys is becoming a pivotal version of their character, and they're starting to go their separate ways while still being a tandem. So I'm also curious how the Nation eventually dissolves, because I don't think they officially break up, if I remember correctly. And of course, we'll see it over time. But I think it's one of those things where they eventually just go their separate ways because they're doing their own things. I do remember D'Lo and Mark Henry had some issues, but I don't recall The Rock ever just disposing of the Nation. I could be wrong, but we will see it happen because they are still getting along at this point. And maybe it's just one of those things that fades over time, especially as their characters are changed. The Nation doesn't really fit to what they're doing now because they're all establishing their characters, especially the Godfather, Mark Henry. They're so different than the Kama and Mark Henry that we know only a few months ago. We get a Tiger Ali Singh and Babu segment. Again, this is just stupid. This is $1 Million Man stuff, so skip right over it until Taker and Kane come out, chokeslam Babu and Tiger Ali Singh. And that's all you need to know about this. So if you're counting at home, that means we have Steve Blackman's a victim here, Val Venus, Vader, and now Tiger Ali Singh and Babu. We have 5 people at the hands of Taker and Kane getting chokeslammed. So we move to the next match here. It is the Headbangers, Mosh and Thrasher. Shout out to them who just signed a nostalgia deal with WWE. So we're going to get some figures of the Headbangers. Can't wait to see that. They're taking on Southern Justice, Dennis Knight and Mark Canterbury. This match goes 4 minutes and 44 seconds. We have Southern Justice getting the win here. Dennis Knight missed a corner charge. Thrasher hit the hot tag to Mosh, but he gets cut off in the middle. He gets hit with Knight and drop with the problem solver. We know that move is the slop drop if you're watching during New Generation. Southern Justice gets the win, and now they're in line for a WWF tag title shot down the line against New Age Outlaws. So we'll see when that happens, but Southern Justice comes out victorious, and pretty solid tag match. I mean, it was very quick, 4 minutes and 44 seconds. So I just like the Headbangers. I like seeing them on my screen, but Southern Justice never really did it for me. But this kind of speaks to the tag division, and I give them some credit. We've been critical when the tag division's not doing it for us, but they did a good job of at least having a mid-card match where it didn't end in a DQ, didn't end in a no contest, and they were building towards building up a number one contender, and that's what they need to do. We go into the next segment here. Taker and Kane are trying to break into Vince's office. Kane has a sledgehammer in hand. Kane obviously gets the door open. They find the room empty. And we go right to commercial break, and we get the intro for the War Zone and lead right in for a European Championship match. It's X-Pac taking on D'Lo Brown. Match was too quick, but I love the chemistry between D'Lo Brown and X-Pac. We get the feeling out process to start the match. They go back and forth with hip tosses and some punches and kicks. D'Lo hit X-Pac playing the best small guy you'll ever see with a clothesline. We get an Irish whip into the corner, more clotheslines. This was one of those things where you could see the potential in the chemistry between the two of them, and it's too short to even really get going. But 3 minutes and 30 seconds ends in a no contest. But because Jeff Jarrett gets in, X-Pac did hit the X Factor. He had the visual pin on D'Lo. Jeff Jarrett arrives, hits X-Pac for the DQ, and Jeff Jarrett has his new haircut, obviously. They're continuing the feud. He has the buzz cut, which is his look that we still see today. No, he has the kind of the golden flowing locks, but the WCW look, the classic Jeff Jarrett kind of buzz cut. X-Pac and Jarrett are brawling through the crowd. D'Lo's in the ring. You guessed it. At home, Taker and Kane get in the ring. They corner him. The Rock runs out to save D'Lo, and D'Lo gets out of dodge, and the Rock gets decimated by the Brothers of Destruction. So Rock, awesome seller, does such a great job at this, and D'Lo kind of left Rock hanging. But like I said, it's a little bit. We'll see over time how it happens with the Nation, but there's never that official moment. This similar to The Rock and Farouk. That was like an official feud. I don't think they're wasting time having a feud between these guys because it doesn't really matter. They want to just have The Rock be main eventing shows, and they want to get there as quick as possible. You have the next match here, Edge versus Mark Marrow, and you guessed it, it's another no contest. They get no chance to get going here because we also get more Kane and Taker. And we also have Gangrel assaulting Edge, which is the reason for the DQ, reason for the no contest, whatever you want to call it. Gangrel and Edge are fighting in the ring. Mark Marrow heads to the locker room, and then Undertaker and Kane attack Mark Marrow on the ramp. So Edge does not get attacked from Taker and Kane, but we also have a Gangrel interference. So they are fueling two masters here. They want to make sure they're advancing the Edge and Gangrel storyline, which will eventually and inevitably wind up being the Brood. But here we are with more Kane and Taker. So we have Jim Ross in with Al Snow and Head. And they did actually talk a little bit about Al Snow wanting to be taken more seriously. And Jim Ross says, well, you carry around a mannequin head. How can people take you seriously? Al Snow says that they, aka him and Head, want to talk to Vince McMahon. And Snow and Head are arguing, and Jim Ross ends the interview, and they move on. Of course, they'll put a bookmark in it. We're going to get more of that going forward. Next match here, we have a quick one. It's the Oddities, which is the team of, the combination of Giant Silva and Kurgan. They have Golga, Luna, Shaggy 2 Dope, and Violent J in their corner, aka ICP, taking on Darren Drozdoff and Road Warrior Animal. So we also have Hawk in the ring wearing a Zubaz jacket and the LOD 2000 gear. Droz and Animal trying to push him out of the ring. They're still doing the drinking / impaired gimmick with Hawk. While this match is going on, Hawk is attacking ICP on the floor. Hawk then gets involved in the match by stealing a tag from Droz, and then tags Kurgan. Kurgan comes in. He hits Hawk, and the match breaks down as Giant Silva gives Hawk a powerbomb for the win. So Hawk wasn't involved in the match, but somehow, some way, he's allowed to get pinned. Whatever, doesn't really matter, but the Oddities get the win here. Not a big fan of this storyline. Doesn't do anything for me. Just sad to see what Legion of Doom had become. Maybe they had high hopes for it. And if Hawk and Animal were behind it, I guess you got to give it a chance, but it definitely does not age well at all as we watch it. We get the backstage segment with Kane and Taker beating up anybody backstage. So if you're counting at home, these guys are jobbers, local talent getting beat up. So some name brands being beat up, but they're driving home and emphasizing Taker and Kane are a force to be reckoned with. We get it, guys. We get it. We have another tag match here. Los Barricos, Jesus Castillo, and Miguel Perez taking on Too Much, which is too cool, but Too Much still. Brian Christopher and Scott Taylor. Too Much gets the win here. And this is Brian Christopher hitting the Tennessee Jam. Scott Taylor gets put on top of Perez for the 3 count. Not a bad match, but this feels like, again, since it's being taped, it feels like they are just kind of like punting a bit, advancing storyline, creating moments that they can show in video packages going forward for these different pay-per-views. But yeah, a decent match, 5 minutes and 6 seconds. Do you have to go out of your way to watch it? Absolutely not. But it was pretty, as far as the Attitude Era goes, they definitely did a lot more wrestling than you probably would have expected, especially with the rest of this night. But we have another match here. Jeff Jarrett taking on Too Cold Scorpio. Jeff Jarrett doing the Don't Piss Me Off gimmick here. This, again, ends in a DQ, not because of Taker and Kane. We will see them get involved again at the end of this night. But X-Pac runs in for the DQ after Jeff Jarrett had the win after a superplex. X-Pac and Jeff Jarrett are now fighting in the crowd. And here comes Taker and Kane one last time. Too Cold gets beat up. Chokeslam from Taker. Vince gets on the ramp. He seems absolutely very happy, clapping for them. And then we get a spiked tombstone to Scorpio. And Taker and Kane both look at McMahon at the same exact time. And the show goes off the air. So never did you ever think Jeff Jarrett and Too Cold Scorpio would main event a Raw. And if you were doing a trivia night and someone said, did Too Cold Scorpio ever main event a Raw? And your answer would be yes, because it did happen. Of course, this is Driving Story. This is Kane and Taker's story. This is what they want to be the story. McMahon has his two monsters that he's going to target. He's going to target Stone Cold with. But that's how it ends. And again, this was a taped Raw Saturday night. Not great by any means, but by the way, I also realized we don't have the scroll here. I apologize for that. So if you're listening on audio, you know nothing's different, but I did not put the scroll of the match results, but it doesn't really matter because this Raw right here was very, as far as matches go, it doesn't matter. It's just all you need to know about that Raw here is that Kane and Taker destroyed everybody on the roster and continue to drive home the point that they may or may not be in cahoots with Vince McMahon, which moves us to the second Raw here. Another Saturday night, WWF Raw Saturday night, September 12th, 1998 from Lowell, Massachusetts, the Songas Arena. All our champs are the same. Everybody has held the titles for another week, especially the ones that just won it at SummerSlam. Triple H, as we mentioned, 8/30, 1998. He's hurt, so he's going to have to drop the title soon, and we'll talk about that. We're going to get to some, they're going to do a tournament for the IC title, unfortunately for us, because Triple H would have been a great IC champion, but they have to relinquish it sooner than later. We open up with a contest here, and it's Edge taking on Jeff Jarrett. And this is right off the bat with music coming out. It's a very rare start for a match where we just have wrestling to start, which feels out of the ordinary for the Attitude Era. Edge and Jarrett have some history because Edge wins his first IC title on a shotgun Saturday night against Jeff Jarrett. This, of course, is not quite there yet. I believe it is in 1999. But had some decent chemistry here. Two lifers in the wrestling business. Edge goes on to do good, big things. They're both active today. Jeff Jarrett on the AEW side, getting a tag title shot on pay-per-view at Double or Nothing more than likely. Edge involved in this Raw World's Champion tournament, triple threat tournament. Moral of the story is they're both active. Decent match. But the DQ finish kind of sucks. I mean, Jeff Jarrett hits the guitar right over Edge's head for the DQ finish. Kind of ruined what was a quality match. And of course, there's some stuff going on with Gangrel and the Southern Justice. And as Pat Patterson says, a lot of gaga, but for the wrestling in the match, I mean, pure wrestling, Edge with the Northern Lights suplexes, some of the stuff we see. Jeff Jarrett hits the stroke at one point, but it's not his finisher. So I did catch that being used as a transition move. Lawler making sure to talk about the issues between Edge and Gangrel, but for the most part, happy to see Raw opening up with wrestling. Edge technically gets the win via DQ, 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Dennis Knight leaves a Southern Justice card on Edge's chest and says, hey, if you guys want, or you want, you can join forces and get our protection. Which leads us into the next match here. Darren Drozdov taking on Bradshaw. So Jim Ross mentions at the beginning of the match that Droz suffered a torn bicep last week, but he's active anyway. He should not be. Bradshaw is also hurt from the Brawl for All finals. And these two guys go out here, have a whatever match. I mean, imagine the match you could think of between Bradshaw and Droz, and that's exactly what it was. We had Bradshaw getting the win after the clothesline from hell. He hits the clothesline from hell. Bradshaw decides to take the easy way out, trips up Droz for the Ric Flair corner pin for the cheap win. So hits the clothesline from hell, which, by the way, clothesline from hell is absolutely epic. One of the best moves in the history of wrestling. So impactful, such a good finisher. We had Droz arguing with Jack Doan, the referee, and then Bradshaw then hits another clothesline from hell. And so that is how the match ends here. Bradshaw getting a cheap victory. Not sure exactly what they're going for here, but yeah, you see promise in Bradshaw. Obviously, we're going to see the APA or the Acolytes be formed soon, and we're going to get a legendary run between the two of them. They're going to join forces with the Ministry, all that good stuff. But if you would have asked me in 1998, would Bradshaw ever be world champion? I probably would have said no, but I definitely see splatterings of the potential here. I think he actually shows great signs of the charisma that we eventually see from him as John Bradshaw Layfield. And I'll admit I was wrong when they first pushed him as the world champion level guy, taking the title of Eddie Guerrero. I did not see it, but I do see it now. I think he is a main guy, and I think he's a great wrestling personality. And you see it here, even in small bursts, 4-minute matches with Darren Drozdoff. You see it there. So we also get a video package to show what the main event for In Your House Breakdown will be on September 27th. And they announced it's going to be Austin versus Kane versus Undertaker in the main event for the WWF Championship. And they're announcing it here. So going to be an interesting main event, triple threat. Obviously, Kane and Taker are working together. And I think Vince believes stacking the deck will continue to put the odds in his favor, but we'll see what happens here. We have another match here. Mark Mero defeating Miguel Perez. Again, this is Mero pulling Perez into TKO for the win to end the match. Most of this is about telling stories here about Sable, and Jim Ross says we'll be seeing Sable highlights from her match at WrestleMania 14 and SummerSlam. You know, Jim Ross was talking about Sable challenging Jacqueline for the women's championship. Yeah, this is all sort of whatever. I know that Sable has been rumored to be part of Playboy soon, so that's going to be down the pike. I think it's going to take a little bit to get there, but big things are happening for Sable. Not so much big things for Mark Mero and Miguel Perez. We get a Michael Cole interview in the back with the Oddities and the ICP, and Luna says the Oddities are in a bunch of pretty faces, and Violent J did cut a decent promo against DOA, so they're pretty active here. They're not just obviously ICP is a musician, a musical group that are just wrestling fans, but they're part of the everyday programming, part of the Oddities for a bit here. And Shaggy 2 Dope and Violent J, huge wrestling fans. They're not quite Bad Bunny, but they, I guess, paved a little bit of a road for what Bad Bunny did last weekend at Backlash, which was amazing, by the way. So if you haven't watched that Bad Bunny and Damian Priest match, go out and check it out. But yeah, ICP are not quite there, but give them credit. They are there from week to week, and they are wanting to be part of this, and they're taking bumps, and we'll talk about it in 1 second, but they're at ringside for this next match here. And the DOA 8-Ball and Skull with Paul Ellering, shout out Paul Ellering, taking on the Oddities, Golga and Kurgan. Giant Silva's in the corner, Luna, Shaggy 2 Dope, and Violent J. Match is really quick, 1 minute and 54 seconds. DQ finish. With ICP getting involved. After the ICP run in and start attacking Skull and 8-Ball, Shaggy 2 Dope takes a power bomb while 8-Ball beats on Violent J at ringside. DOA get on their bikes and ride off, and the crowd is actually chanting ICP as the segment goes to commercial break. But Shaggy 2 Dope took a power bomb here, and 8-Ball beating up Violent J. It's a pretty big deal. These dudes are training to be wrestlers and taking bumps, but they were not being taken easy on. So lower than mid-card feud. It's lower than that, but at least these guys are, as wrestling fans, they're probably just happy to be there at this point. We get the War Zone with JR and Jerry Lawler, and we get The Rock coming to the ring, and he wants to talk about the ladder match, Triple H SummerSlam. He said, I did exactly what I was going to do, Triple H. I hurt Triple H, even though he's the IC champion. It's a ladder match. It's based on luck. The Rock said, I'm still the people's champion. There's nothing anybody can do about that. And he's also mad that Undertaker and Kane for attacking him last week. And he's like, I knew I was going to get my ass whooped, but they're not going to get away with it. The Rock will take his right hand, raise the people's eyebrow, and lay the smack down on Kane's candy ass if you smell what I'm cooking. So hitting all the punchlines, hitting all the catchphrases, and starting to get some of a little bit of a babyface reaction. Not fully babyface quite yet, but you can see the fans want to sing along with The Rock as he says it, and they want to cheer him. They're trying to get there, and of course they'll pull the plug on that, turning him heel with the corporation, but he's starting to turn babyface with the people's champion stuff. It's a slow burn towards that. He doesn't do anything specific to turn face, but it's just there, and they don't want to deny it for now, but I think they're going to realize The Rock is a very good babyface, and I think they're to show where he's come from 1996 WWF, where he was at, where people were chanting literally "Die Rocky Die." They were not a fan of him, to say the least. To see where he is now, his charisma is undeniable. The guy is just, The Rock is pro wrestling personified. We get the next match here, Too Much, which is the combination of Brian Christopher and Scott Taylor taking on Southern Justice, which is, as we know, Dennis Knight and Mark Canterbury. Canterbury and Knight are too much, pun intended, for Brian Christopher and Scott Taylor from the beginning. We get Southern Justice getting the win, problem solver on Scott Taylor. We got a little bit from Too Much, but this was kind of a glorified 4-minute squash match where we got a little bit of offense, as I mentioned, from Brian Christopher and Scott Taylor, but not too much of it. Southern Justice is involved in a little bit of a mini push here on their way to getting a tag title shot, and they're putting some momentum behind them. We get Vader versus Dustin Runnels, and Dustin is doing he is coming back Messiah sort of religious gimmick here that not ideal. I don't think it's something that probably was in good taste. And we all talk about Dustin Runnels and Goldust and the trajectory of his career, and maybe he was in not such a good spot here, and he's trying something creatively to get his mind right. Not sure, but Val Venus is in the crowd holding a sign that says "I have come," because Dustin Runnels is doing he is coming back. This is interesting to me, where Dustin Runnels and Vader are going back and forth, and it's 3 minutes and 24 seconds. Vader manhandles Dustin Runnels, avalanche for Vader bomb for the 3 count. Val Venus, even though he's in the crowd, didn't get involved. And these guys, Dustin Runnels is an underrated worker, and so is Vader, but Vader obviously is on the back end of what was his legendary career. But Dustin Runnels, even though he was in a bad spot too, there's hints of what could have been a really cool program. And I would probably venture a guess that they both worked in WCW at some point when he was the big bad and Dustin Runnels was doing the natural gimmick. But you see some of that stuff here, and Dustin Runnels is mad at himself for getting violent during the match. They're trying to tell a story here. It does not hit the same way it probably did in real time. Maybe it didn't hit at all, but it's just mid-card stuff. Like, I still see the Vader appeal. Like, there's still, and again, this is probably blinded by the fact that I'm a fan of the guy. You could see some of the bright spots from him, but also that you miss the boat. I mean, if you go back to SummerSlam against Shawn Michaels, they missed the boat and they never quite got back there. And Vader was, at some point, the fans just stopped caring because you continue to show them that they shouldn't care for a guy like Vader because you beat him up every turn of the way. I mean, used as a guy that Kane just beat up on pay-per-view at No Way Out, and everybody else got their licks in on Vader because he's a big guy that has they were just chipping at the armor of him because he had some appeal to building up guys on their way up, but they never quite built him back up. So anytime he's involved getting a mini push, people don't really take it seriously. We have Al Snow appearing in the crowd. He gets in the ring, and there's mannequin heads handed out to the fans, and they decided they won't leave the ring until they meet with the WWF official. And Commissioner Slaughter, Pat Patterson, Gerald Briscoe come down, and there's like, Al Snow and Head, you guys got to get out of the ring. Snow's making fun of them. He says that Head's the new WWF commissioner. Sergeant Slaughter is not happy with Al Snow, and Briscoe and Patterson get interrupted by Snow, and they're threatening him with like, dude, you're going to call the cops. We're going to arrest you. Al Snow takes Head, hits Pat Patterson between the legs, and then storming off back through the crowd. The fans pop huge for this, and you can kind of see people getting behind Al Snow and seeing that the character's working. They're touching on something that is working, and we've seen that slow build of Al Snow. It hasn't been as quickly as you imagine, but it won't be long till he's on TV winning the Hardcore Championship and being involved in very meaningful program where people are excited to see him. So it was a very slow build. I did not remember how they brought him in, and it's been pretty well done. They were really leaning on the ECW gimmick with it. It definitely, you can see that the ECW gimmick is very highly influenced in this, and he probably had creative say into what he was doing, and you can see why it was successful. We get a Michael Cole interview with the Headbangers backstage. They are saying, like, we are essentially jobbers, but they said that, and they used the quote, shotgun Saturday night level talent. And they're going to be taking on the Nation, which, they know that they have an uphill climb, and they reference that. So it was interesting to see an interview where guys were referencing that I still think back to the Royal Rumble interview where Rock is running down the roster about guys he's afraid of. And I think he mentions Headbanger Mosh, or was it Thrasher? I forget. But he talks about guys he's scared of in the Rumble. I think it's the Royal Rumble 2000 build-up promo. And he mentions the Headbanger Mosh. I think it's Mosh, but it's hilarious. But it just speaks to their level on the card. But they lean into it instead of leaning against it and being upset by it. They understand their role in the card, which makes them even more likable. So can't wait to get their elite figures. Maybe, dare I say, ultimate edition versions of the Headbangers. Who knows what they're going to do with the nostalgia stuff, or even the shirts. Release the real men wear a skirts shirt. Be awesome. So the aforementioned Headbangers take on the Nation. This is a DQ finish here. The match breaks down. D'Lo and Mark Henry are thrown into each other. Thrasher and Mosh double team D'Lo. Chyna hits the ring. She beats up Mark Henry. 5 minutes and 23 seconds. Chyna's beating the crap out of all the refs. And the New Age Outlaws and Triple H come back to the ring to pull Chyna off. They're the only ones that can do it. And we're getting more Chyna, Mark Henry tension, sexual chocolate stuff that's going to be built up throughout the rest of the year. And we go to our main event, which is DX taking on Kai and Tai, which is an interesting dynamic. It's an 8-man tag match. Billy Gunn, Road Dogg, Triple H, and X-Pac with Chyna taking on Dick Togo, Men's Teo, Sho Funaki, and Taka Michinoku. Of course, Yamaguchi-san is in their corner. 8-man tag match. And Triple H gets on the mic. He reminds everybody that DX was undefeated at SummerSlam. I won the IC title. New Age Outlaws won the tag team championships. And we've now seen every WWF champion on our screens, aside from Steve Austin. We know that Steve Austin had that dislocated jaw at SummerSlam, so he's healing. Taka goes back and forth with Road Dogg. They really protect Triple H in this match, who's hurt. Keep in mind, as he's wrestling this match, he hits Teo with a face buster. And then we get Kai and Tai and Road Dogg going back and forth. Kai and Tai was double teaming Road Dogg. Going to the ending here, X-Pac lands a Bronco Buster on Taka, which I love the dynamic between Taka and X-Pac. We talked about it earlier about D'Lo Brown and X-Pac, but maybe just the common denominator is X-Pac here. He just works so well with guys of all sizes. So the Outlaws launch X-Pac into Taka, and then he hits an X Factor for the 3 count. And we have some stuff after the match. Match goes 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Chyna hits Yamaguchi-san off the apron. And this is probably a better version of what you're seeing would be like maybe, I don't know, a normal main event. They gave it more time. Obviously, everybody knows DX is beating Kai and Tai. A fun match, like the finish. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's a squash match because there was some back and forth, but there never was a doubt that Kai and Tai potentially would have beat DX. It just wasn't going to happen, and it's just not happening here. DX is, doing their normal stuff with the crowd after they get a girl to, show her butt during Raw. So this is, and based on my research, you will see again a variation of this match, but broken down to a one-on-one. And on both sides, we get Triple H versus Taka Michinoku on Raw in 2000. I think it's April. So we're going to see all this time, 2 years built up between Taka Michinoku and Triple H. We will eventually see it again. But interesting way to end Raw. Again, it's a Saturday. They're not against Nitro. So this is one of those, maybe they're trying to be a little bit more creative on both these shows, knowing they don't stand a chance as far as ratings go. Let's try something different. The first Raw that we saw probably was a little bit more heavy with DQs, no contest, and storyline driven, where it's just like segment after segment where Taker and Kane are getting involved. But this next one's a little bit more wrestling heavy, which maybe the most wrestling heavy Raw that we've seen altogether. I mean, opening up with a wrestling match and leading right into another one. And even though the wrestling matches weren't work rate centric, it definitely was interesting, especially the way they ended it with no Stone Cold, no crazy shot angle after, just good old fashioned 8-man tag ending it. Really reminded me of an episode of Dynamite Like it really, like the way it ended with, they started to emphasize some of the main things they want to get done with pushing younger guys. But with that main event, it just felt just a fun match to emphasize the talent on the DX side. And we lead back to a Monday, only 2 days later. It's Raw's War from San Jose, California, September 14th, 1998, the San Jose Arena. And this is live. All our champs are the same. And we open the night with Stone Cold meeting Vince McMahon, Taker, and Kane inside the ring. This is how you start an episode of Raw, especially leading out of that Saturday. They needed to get right back and punch Nitro right in the mouth. And that's exactly what they did. Get the fans to tune back in Monday and tell them why they usually tune in for Raw on 9 p.m. Eastern. Vince McMahon interrupts Austin's entrance, and he just gets on the mic and says he's so sick and tired of seeing Austin carry that belt around. And he said at Breakdown, I won't ever have to see you hold that championship ever again because my master plan is coming into effect. They talk more about the triple threat match with Taker and Kane. And he says, I made a business deal with Taker and Kane. They're going to be protecting me from you this whole thing. So if you lay a finger on me, Taker and Kane are going to annihilate you. Vince says in this match for the triple threat for the title at Breakdown, there's a stipulation for the triple threat. Undertaker and Kane can only pin or submit Austin to end the match and win the title so that Austin can be annihilated throughout the match. So they have to pin him. And Vince says that it's basically a handicap match without saying it. Begs the question, why wouldn't you just do a handicap match? What is he hiding at this point? Who's over? What? There's no Jack Tunney overseeing, no Gorilla Monsoon. It's just all Vince. I mean, they'll eventually throw like different. I mean, Sergeant Slaughter's still a heel too. So there's no one really overstepping him. So begs the question, why not just strip him of the title? Vince says, I want you to know I didn't screw Stone Cold. Stone Cold screwed Stone Cold. And Austin hits Vince, which brings out both Kane and Taker. They hit a double choke slam to Austin. McMahon does the best Stone Cold impression right in his face. And JR on the mic was great at ringside, saying, how hideous can a human being be? Austin can't survive these two monsters. And they made sure to emphasize September 27th with the date being Breakdown. I guess it's not a main pay-per-view. You want to drive it home that it's an important date. It's where Breakdown is. But wrestling's so hot. People are going to tune in. They're going to buy it on pay-per-view no matter what. Once Taker and Kane and McMahon head up the ramp, Taker grabs the mic and he tells Austin it's not personal, it's just business. Vince McMahon wraps up the segment telling Austin he'll be defending the title tonight against Ken Shamrock. Begs the question, why would Kane and Taker be okay with that? But again, whatever. Maybe they're promising another shot if Ken Shamrock wins the title. After the break, we get Austin pissed off, but we go right into a wrestling match. It's the Road Dogg in a singles action taking on Jeff Jarrett. They have history here, obviously. The Roadie started his career in WWF with Jeff Jarrett, the guy behind With My Baby Tonight, the magical voice behind it. Jeff Jarrett has Dennis Knight and Mark Canterbury in his corner. Of course, Road Dogg has Billy Gunn and X-Pac evening the odds. So this is going to give us some closure to that Jarrett-Roadie feud in 95. Road Dogg is running wild, hits the shaky knee for a 2 count to begin. Jeff Jarrett eventually gets the win. But, you know, we got some good stuff here. Jarrett uses what's left of guitar, slams the guitar neck over Road Dogg's throat for a 3 count. It is, to me, a pretty good feud. I kind of, and I hate to say this, I think they're doing a really good, this is how Jeff Jarrett should be using. It might be exactly how they're using him in AEW. And he's not a top guy. I just think he's a mid-card type of guy, but this is the right way to use him where it's back and forth. It's very petty feud between the both sides. Jarrett has his goons, Road Dogg has his goons, and they both go out of their way to one-up each other everywhere, every step of the way. I mean, with Southern Justice getting involved and DX getting involved, you know, it's a big piece to what eventually develops with the rest of DX as they separate from just being lackeys of Triple H. And it's cool to see different variations of DX team up. And I understand it's a singles match, but having X-Pac get the help of Road Dogg and Billy Gunn, it definitely creates a different dynamic, because for a while the Outlaws felt like they were on an island by themselves, just teaming up with DX, but seeing them with X-Pac bridges that gap, because Triple H isn't just X-Pac's friend. It's everybody's friends. So really cool. I actually enjoyed this a lot, and 3 minutes and 6 seconds, so it's not long at all. So it's, you blink, you missed it kind of thing, but telling stories here. We go backstage after the break. Road Dogg is being put in an ambulance from the guitar shot to his throat. He says he's having trachea problems and he can't breathe. Slaughter, even though he's a heel, comes up to the ambulance, is trying to figure out if he's okay. Trying, obviously, and Billy Gunn's like, "Get the hell away from us. You've always had an issue with us. Why do you care now?" And we go to a Michael Cole segment with The Rock backstage, and The Rock is having some problems with the Nation, and they can't agree on what to do. And Rock says he's going to go kick Kane's ass, and everybody is not really behind it. They want to make a better decision with what's going to happen here, because they understand having Kane and Taker getting involved with what's going on, especially after the week they're destroying everybody. It's almost a death sentence. But we get into the next match here. It's Kane and The Rock taking on each other in a match with Undertaker in his corner. And this is a pay-per-view quality match. On paper, Kane and The Rock, you see this pull up on the card anytime. Both these guys are top level guys. I mean, Kane, multiple time world champion. The Rock is The Rock, held every title you can potentially hold in the company. They go back and forth in this match, and they definitely both get good offense. And it's awesome to see, all of the different dynamics have grown over time. Kane is such a great big man. Rock has, fallen into his own. And again, hasn't been an official face turn over time. He's only a few weeks away from being that dastardly heel, taking on Triple H and pot shots and low blows and all that. But he's becoming the people's champion, and it's just organically, and they're just following that wave. But looking how Kane is able to utilize his offense, one of the best big men in history of wrestling, going back and forth with The Rock. They link up so well together. Their chemistry is so great here. And we get some shenanigans at the end of this match, most notably Mankind returning. He hits Kane in the back with a sledgehammer to even the odds. Taker sees this happen. He chases after Mankind, and The Rock slides over, puts his arm over Kane for the 3 count. 6 minutes and 10 seconds. Rock, obviously underdog into this, but he's only a few months away from being world champion. When he's in the ring with a bigger name, it feels like, now it's natural to watch it, but at the time, wrestling a guy like Kane, who just held the WWF title and being in the same aura as The Undertaker at this point, was a pretty big jump for his character. But that's what they needed to do, and I think the exposure has helped him grow exponentially over time. But I think if you're going to watch this match, like with the context of everything going on, I think everybody watching this would enjoy this. It's kind of a bright spot for me, especially in the last few weeks where there's not a lot of good matches. Even though there's the obvious Attitude Era stuff going on, you're going to be watching a guy who is right there about to push through that ceiling and launch through it and become a huge star. There is not a lot to be said that hasn't been said about a guy like The Rock, but also about Kane and just the ability to really mesh their styles together and have the ability to, in 6 minutes and 9 seconds, tell a beautiful story. And The Rock's ability to captivate the audience and come from underneath. And even though it took Mankind and a sledgehammer to get the win, he still got the win here, which is important as you establish him as a guy who can overcome the odds. So we get Kane refusing Taker's help, and Taker grabs the mic, looks to end the feud with Mankind tonight, and he tells him to bring that goddamn sledgehammer. So Kane and Taker having some issues, but also Mankind who's back, and that's awesome to see, even in the odds and the history between 4 of those guys too. You can also talk about history with The Rock and Foley and Kane. It's just so great to see these big personalities in these segments, and it's just on a weekly TV show in the middle of the card. It's not this big main event. It's not this high, like you have to, it was just one of those things. Just spoke to how stacked the roster truly was. When we get back, Michael Cole has Mankind. He's talking with them. Mankind says, "I accept your challenge, Taker." And he says, "This is going to be a scientific match and may the best man win." After that, he's just beating up the set and the interview set and just throwing the things around. So he's emphasizing. So now we got The Rock as a face naturally, organically over time. Looks like Mankind has returned as a face now that he's targeting Kane and Taker. Not been an official turn. And then obviously it's hard to boo Mick Foley in any capacity, especially after what went down at King of the Ring 1998. But at the same time, it just shows how you don't have to do this segment like the Marty Jannetty, Shawn Michaels barbershop level, where you can establish Marty Jannetty is now the face, Shawn Michaels is now the heel. There doesn't have to be that. Sometimes it just grows over time and from week to week. I know wrestling fans sometimes have the memory of a goldfish, but it just, you got to follow what the crowds are doing, and people just kind of catch fire and want to watch a guy rise up the card. And that could be the same was said about Rock, same was said about Foley. People wanted to see them on their screen and they were contagious. I mean, the People's Elbow, the whole package made The Rock very appealing for fans in a live arena to cheer him. And it just took off naturally. And that's the missing part. They wanted so badly to get this reaction from the jump. When he first came in, they wanted this organic reaction. You could say the same thing about Roman Reigns. When you want something and you force it and force it and force it, people resent it. It has to happen organically. And that story is this tale as old as time. The Rock is an example of it here. Roman Reigns is probably the latest example of it now. But it just takes time for people to come into their own, and you can't force people to react a certain way. As much as WWE wants to be the puppeteer and pull the strings and make people react in a certain way, you can't pipe in those Rocky chants and make it sound organic. You can, of course. I mean, they did it with the Thunderdome, and they could certainly add it to the Fox production and make crowds sound organic. But if you compare it to like the Backlash crowd at Puerto Rico, that natural reaction, nothing tops that. Nothing tops this organic reaction The Rock's getting. And I think it's frustrating a lot of times for the machine that is WWE, WWF at this point. They want to expedite things, but sometimes organic growth can't be expedited. You have to let it grow. And they're bearing that fruit with The Rock because they were patient. And also now, I mean, even with Roman, to go bring it back to today, he is a heel, but that reaction, that buzz in the arena, you can't create that. You can't create that. It has to happen over time. So, I mean, compare any of those piped in Thunderdome shows where they would pipe in whatever noise they wanted to manufacture whatever noise they had, and compare it to that Backlash show with that Puerto Rico crowd that was absolutely living and dying with every move in that ring. Wrestling's on a different level when fans react that way. That Carlito pop, the Bad Bunny, Chambea sing along they had on his entrance, and every little thing takes this next level. You can go back and watch, Rock Hogan from WrestleMania 18 and understand like the things they did in that match wasn't insane, but put that match in front of a lesser crowd, it's not great. Same thing with Damian Priest and Bad Bunny. Point being, let guys grow organically, and that's point case right here with The Rock. We get in the ring, Dustin Runnels is in there complaining about just immortality, and he says that I'll let Val Venus know when he returns. You're going to have to repent for your sins, Val. Val comes out, and he wants to show his latest video. It's called The Preacher's Wife. They show Val Venus in bed smoking a cigar with Marlena. So touching on Dustin Runnels' heartstrings, Dustin drops to his knees in tears, and Val makes a joke about how, dropping to your knees runs in your family. And Ross does refer to her as Dustin's wife, Terry. So we're going to see Terry Runnels kind of emerge on our screens again. But this is Marlena here with the Gold Dust stuff. The crowd is cheering because they don't like Dustin Runnels, but it just speaks to the Attitude Era where like the lines are blurred. This is a heel move from Val Venus, but same thing with the Yamaguchi-san stuff where he stole his wife, but he's somehow the face in the scenario. Makes no sense. We get a Steven Regal video package. We just mentioned he's going to, they wanted to bring him in. And here it is with the man's man stuff. Cutting down trees is in the wilderness. Theme song, pretty good. He's a man, such a man. So, yeah, Steve Regal gets out there, and we're going to see him probably next week. And we get the WWF Intercontinental Championship on the line here on Raw. Owen Hart taking on Triple H. And again, got to remember, Triple H is hurt, and he's working hurt. I don't think he realizes how badly he's hurt, so he's going to need some time off soon. But we get a pretty good match between Owen and Triple H, and of course, this is a rematch from WrestleMania 14. A pretty technical match to begin. Of course, we get a swinging neck breaker from Owen, and then the flying elbow for a near fall. The crowd is absolutely behind Triple H. They are against Owen Hart, chanting nugget at him. And Triple H lands a high knee for a 2 count. And then he hits that classic face buster for another 2 count. And then Owen is pretending that his knee's hurting, and Chyna gets up on the apron. Owen tries to hit a spinning kick, and then he looks for the sharpshooter when Mark Henry pulls Chyna down to the floor. X-Pac now is out there, and he gets, on Mark Henry's back. China then hits Mark Henry with an elbow. Owen is distracted by all this chaos on the outside, turns around, kick to the stomach pedigree. Triple H gets the win. 5 minutes and 23 seconds. He retains the IC title. Owen is distracted by everything, obviously, as we said. And Mark Henry is leaving up the ramp. And Triple H is definitely trying his best to work through this injury. And again, nobody knows exactly how badly hurt he is. And we're going to talk about it next week, a little bit about it. Mark Henry challenges X-Pac and Mark's girlfriend to a handicap match. And Triple H has 2 words for them. And this is something that, Triple H and Owen have great chemistry, that meaningful program, but they really hardly mention their history, which is interesting. And that's par for the course with WWE. That's what they do at times. This is a big, they have built-in history, and we speak about it all the time about not leaning into it because of the memories of the fans, or they don't want to muddy the water. They want people to live in the moment, but Triple H and Owen have that history. You might as well lean on it to make it feel important. But yeah, solid match. The shenanigans could I do without it? Yeah, I could do without the shenanigans on the outside because I think Triple H and Owen could put on a stellar match for the IC title. But again, you got to always put that asterisk. It is the Attitude Era, so you are going to see things like this. We get Mankind loading up a dumpster with weapons in the back, and he's whistling "Whistle While You Work" from Snow White. So Mankind tapping at the heartstrings. Always loved Disney. Mankind always had the heart of a child, and he's the innocence of a child. And that's what made the Mankind character so interesting because that really hardcore side that we saw from Cactus. And then also the childlike innocence of Mankind where he's taken advantage of, where you can't help but empathize and sympathize with them. So we get Mankind versus Taker in a no disqualification match. This match goes 7 minutes and 20 seconds, back and forth. Good stories being told, weapons being used. We got Mankind's mask coming off at one point, and we get Kane getting involved, obviously. And then we have The Rock making the save, shooting out of the dumpster. He grabs Mankind, throws him over the barricade to prevent Taker and Kane from grabbing him. Taker and Kane now have sledgehammers. They go looking for The Rock. Match doesn't get a chance to finish despite being no DQ. The ref had to throw it out. There's a lot that happened in this match. Aside from the action, The Rock and Mankind are now clearly the baby faces. We mentioned it over the course of the last 3 episodes that they're showing Rock and Mankind in a favorable light against the opponents, and the fans want to cheer them. They are both behind the actions they have, and they are not leaning against it. Creative could have went against it and leaned in to say, we want him as a heel. We want Foley as a heel. We want The Rock as a heel. That's not the case here. And Undertaker and Kane are evidently heels. And they were so resistant for this on the build to SummerSlam, which is so fascinating to me because the SummerSlam match would have benefited from having Taker have this edge to his character here, because I think that Madison Square Garden crowd so desperately wanted to kind of have a roadmap about who they should cheer, and they just didn't have it. They both the crowd respected Taker and Austin in that match. Whereas here, clearly Taker has a heel side to him. We're going to see it kind of emerge over time about what the character becomes. And he definitely evolves this year with the ministry and becomes more demonic than ever. We're going to see him at his, you can compare him to Lucifer at WrestleMania 15 in the Hell in a Cell match against Boss Man. But from now until then, there's some character development. But I think if they would have did this back right in the build to SummerSlam, I think it would have really helped that match. But who knows? I do enjoy what they're doing this now, but I think also too, having The Rock rub shoulders with these bigger stars, I think it also was important to his growth. And, I think obviously Mankind and Taker, this is not the match you think of when you think about their feud, but there's so much that goes on here, and seeing a different side of every single person in this match, whether it be the different side of Foley and a different side of The Rock, but also a different side of Taker. Like, we're seeing a lot of the violence from Taker come out, and he just seems like he won't stop. And he's almost snapped a bit, where it's more just, like I said, it's devil related. It's not even close to the same character, and it's going to grow in a very satanic way. And he's not quite there yet, but the heel tendencies of him it shows that he has the capability of being very dynamic and have a great deal of range when it comes to developing the character. And like I said, The Rock's role in this is awesome. And having his involvement, kudos to them for taking the risk of putting him here and not just being stuck and saying he's a heel. We need him as a heel in the nation. We need him at this point. They recognized it, followed what the fans were doing, and they paid off handsomely for it. And it's so awesome to see all 4 of these guys involved in meaningful programming, 4 of the best to ever do it. And it's so important to see and so essential to the growth of the program on WWF side, but also The Rock. It just shows how much trust they're putting in, and they can see just, I guess, what was going to happen, which is amazing to see that they were forecasting that. We finally have the payoff between Edge and Gangrel. They've been attacking each other back and forth. This ends in a double count out. They go back and forth. They did, we get some back and forth neck breaker out of a corner. We get Edge off the top rope. We get also Edge was trying a plancha. He misses it, and Gangrel moves out of the way. He hits an impaler DDT on the floor. Both guys are just kind of laid out, double count out. After the match, which is 3 minutes and 36 seconds, by the way, Gangrel grabs the liquid and he says something about, the blood is flowing through your veins and that eternity is forever. So this is leading to the Brood. We're about to see Christian Cage debut to form one of the best trios in the history of wrestling. And we're off to the races. So why they decided to build them this way, where they are bonded through combat. I mean, we've seen it over and over again. The BCC is the latest example, but even like Sheamus and Cesaro, they kind of go back to that old trope where they're like, all right, let's beat each other up until we respect each other. I'm not sure if Gangrel and Edge have this respect quite yet, but it will be evident soon that they are going to form a faction, that they're stronger together than apart. But Brood, good stuff. It's essential to Edge's growth, Christian's growth. Great theme music too, so excited to see it. And the bloodbath stuff is always fascinating as well. So we also have Mark Henry taking on China and X-Pac in a 2-on-1 handicap match. They make sure to remind us on commentary that the Outlaws aren't around. So China is obviously, she's very active, and her part in the early side of this career, obviously she was a valet. She was involved on the outside. But you saw the early chops of becoming a wrestler that is to be not messed with, because she becomes an IC champion. She's able to hold her own with the men, but we get a lot of good action here. Most notably, China and X-Pac double suplexing Mark Henry, which is a huge deal. I mean, 365 pounds, and Henry presses X-Pac onto Ref Jack Doan. Mark Henry then forces X-Pac in the corner, avalanches him, and then we get stuff breaking down. So we get X-Pac hitting the Bronco Buster, tags in China, and then D'Lo Brown's at ringside, grabs the foot, and Henry power slams him in midair for the 3 count, 3 minutes and 54 seconds. China comes out of the ropes from the side of the ring, and this point, what's going to happen is interesting, because we're going to see the relationship grow between Henry and China. But I think the biggest thing I pulled from here is China able to take the offense of the men and not just cower away like most other women in wrestling have been presented. You think back, even Miss Elizabeth, how she was presented. And I know China is China. She's the 9th wonder of the world for a reason. But just the presentation of the intergender wrestling that we're seeing here was very interesting. And I think they probably realized what they had in China, maybe not at this moment, but very soon, that she could keep and hold her own believably with the men, and a meaningful program with guys like Jeff Jarrett, Chris Jericho, and it's coming soon. We're definitely going to be seeing that soon. So we're also getting an evening gown match. Before that, they showed a highlight from a rewind of the Harvey Whippleman, Howard Finkel tuxedo match. Obviously, the evening gown match follows the same format, but essentially you have to rip the clothes off your opponent. Sable rips at Jackie's gown, gives her a Sable bomb, pulls her gown off. We get some wardrobe malfunctions. Sable wins. Her clothes don't come off at all. And they do zoom in on someone in the crowd who will become Tori down the line, who will be a part of the roster soon, similar to that moment where Stacy Keibler was in the crowd that they showed during her Hall of Fame thing. This was a moment where Tori was involved as well. So if you're not familiar with Tori, she eventually is involved with DX as well. So she becomes part of the roster years later, maybe I think 2 years later, 2001, 2000, something like that. And here we are with this match, and it was non-eventful, happened really quickly. I don't even have a time on this. It probably was like overall a minute and 30 seconds. But yeah, evening gown match. Same rules as the tuxedo match, if you didn't know. So we get Ken Shamrock in the back, and he's talking about his WWF title shot, and he means Stone Cold, no disrespect, but this is the calm before the storm, and I'm going to take the title from you, which leads us into our next match here. It's Steve Austin versus Ken Shamrock for the WWF Championship, and I think this could have been a money feud. I think down the line, this could have been a big pay-per-view, a WrestleMania-level main event. Ken Shamrock, a legit badass. Stone Cold, a legit badass. Two guys in there who are believable, and that could beat any guy on any given day. This is the first time we're seeing Austin wrestle on Raw since winning the championship back from Kane the night after King of the Ring. So it's been a long time. I know he has some injuries to heal, most notably this injury following SummerSlam, that dislocated jaw where he got knocked out during the main event. He starts the match with his t-shirt on, and they're trading shots to start. These guys go back and forth, some hard shots here. They are going at it, and there's some great spots here. And Ken Shamrock held his own. And that, I want to make sure I emphasize that Ken Shamrock looked on par with Stone Cold Steve Austin during this match, and he got some offense in. And we saw some technical prowess from Austin as well, grabbing some submissions and some of the ringmaster level moveset that we saw here. Shamrock was in control for some of the match. And before we get anything that decisive, we get Taker and Kane getting involved. No contest. Taker chokeslams Shamrock. Kane then handles Austin. We get the save from Rock and Mankind. Mr. McMahon's on the ramp. He's looking confused. The Rock and Mankind are brawling with Taker and Kane, not understanding why are these guys involved in my business at this point. Austin goes to ringside. He grabs a chair. He wails Taker and Kane, wails them. And then Austin then runs up the ramp. McMahon realizes, oh shit, he's coming for me. And the show ends as Austin is chasing Vince with the chair. I loved seeing some of the Austin stuff as we talked about. He's willing to break the rules to get out of things. I mean, we also saw, not to mention in this match, he thumbed Shamrock in the eye. He low blowed him. And that's not, I mean, faces do that. Like Hogan was notorious for doing things like that. But it validated who Ken Shamrock was as a professional wrestler because of the fact that Austin had to resort to that. How often do you see Austin have to resort to low blows and thumbing to the eyes to make sure he doesn't lose his title? It really talks about two things. I mean, Austin, the desperation to overcome the odds that Vince throw in his path, and also legitimizes Ken Shamrock as a threat. And they never quite got there. And I'd love to see the game plan if there was anything similar to maybe Ken Shamrock being champion. But I will always say 1998 was a missed opportunity to put the title on Shamrock. I think, especially in the era where you're just dropping titles, I think Ken Shamrock especially could have been that hired gun for a guy like Vince McMahon, that instead of vacating the title after this pay-per-view, maybe put it on Ken Shamrock for a little bit of time. I mean, they're willing to have short title reigns. I mean, goddamn, they had a day-long reign from Kane from the First Blood match. So clearly they're willing. Clearly, like, Ken Shamrock was a guy that they took serious enough to put him in the main event. They gave him 12 minutes with Stone Cold. They went back and forth. It's just really, really awesome. One of my favorite matches I've seen on Raw, and there's been a lot of them. But as far as sheer wrestling goes, there was a lot to be said and a lot to like about this match. Go back and check this match out. Ken Shamrock belongs in the main event conversation. I understand he doesn't have the longevity a lot of guys have and goes on to do different things and maybe steps back from wrestling, but he is one of those guys that paved the way for these guys that are transitioning from Ultimate Fighting to professional wrestling. Mentioned before, a guy like Brock Lesnar, a guy like Matt Riddle, they have a place in wrestling because Ken Shamrock pretty much paved the way. And I understand Lesnar was before that, But as far as like what made Lesnar's second run so legitimate is because of UFC and what he did. And the currency that became coming from UFC to go to WWE was almost created by a guy like Ken Shamrock, because the back of UFC was built on a guy like Ken Shamrock's legacy. Same thing with Dan Severn. You can't dispute that. So Ken Shamrock's ability to bring a legitimate flavor to professional wrestling was always that line they were balancing. Legitimate tough guy with, real life championships in the octagon. And I know UFC didn't have the same appeal that it did back now in 1998. I understand UFC was still emerging as a brand. Ken Shamrock is the ultimate badass, uncrowned champion in my mind. And I think eventually he should have been champion, whether it was tonight or another night. Ken Shamrock would have been the perfect guy to at least have a transition with the belt, because he was that awesome. So questions we're left with: are Rock and Mankind on Austin's side? Are they just like feuding with Kane and Taker? Are we seeing a little bit of a union there? So we have some questions, and that's the best part about these Raws, is we're left with questions. We get some answers, but it leads us into we need to watch next week. With that being said, let's get to the chaser, and let's talk about what I thought was the best match or best moment from these 3 nights of Raw.
The chaser.
All right, so every week we'll pick our favorite part, and I'll pick my favorite part of these 3 Raws. And I know I just talked about it before, so it's like recency bias in my brain, but Steve Austin versus Ken Shamrock was an absolutely epic contest. Love to see Ken Shamrock being put in this light. But I also have to say, a little honorable mention to The Rock here with the slow, organic face turn that we're seeing from him. It's not forced, it's not contrived. It's just, here he is, follow what the fans are doing, and then book accordingly. And that's exactly what they did. And I think a lot of times they lose sight of that because they're too smart for their own goods. They don't trust what their fans say. They don't trust the organic reactions. They want to dictate what fans should cheer for. And that was the opposite of what they're doing, which is interesting. Like, the hottest the product has ever been is at this point, and they're following what the fans want. They're not going against it because they feel like they know better. And I think that's the equation that has kind of lost sight about from 1998 to 2023, is they so desperately want to tell us what we need to like, rather than just kind of following and booking around what is getting over organically. And there's been bits of time where they book to the fans and what we call fan service, but they never quite stick with it. Eventually they get back on the path that they always intended to get. People can point out Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 30. Well, that moment lives forever, but it wasn't long until he lost the title. Go back to Kofi Kingston with Kofi Mania. Wasn't long until he lost the title, because that wasn't what they intended. That wasn't what they wanted. That wasn't on the blueprint of what they established a year prior. They have these long-term plans and they refuse to pivot. You can make the latest example with Sami Zayn. They refuse to pivot. And you got to think of the missed opportunities that probably we don't even know about because of the fact that their refusal to pivot over the last couple of years. Steve Austin was an example of a guy where you just followed from his Austin 316 speech after defeating Jake Roberts all the way down to The Rock here, where they easily could have said he's a heel. He was intended to be a heel, but they followed what the fans were doing. They wanted to cheer him. They wanted him to be something that they weren't presenting on the screen, and they didn't go against it. It's like a whirlpool. Why would you go the opposite direction? Just go with the flow. And so many times the company today refuse to follow that formula and just go with what the fans want. Not everything has to be what the fans want. And I understand you have to build up, like, okay, there's got to be consistency in the product and you don't want to hot shot different stories, but there's been so many times where they just bypass what the fans want. And that's what really alienates fans. And I think that's why so many people go back to WWF 1998 and the Attitude Era at large, because it was a different time where it felt like they were giving us what they want. At the end of the day, there was going to be days where you walked away from the program and you were unhappy, but more times than not, at the end of the story, there was you and the fans are happy. And there was always the exception. You go to 1999 Royal Rumble where Vince walks out, and I'm sure people were pissed and turned that off. And I'm sure that on the forums and on, online on the AOL chat rooms were saying how badly booked the show was. But we know the culmination of that story. It ends with WrestleMania 15, Austin standing on top of Vince, pouring beer on him as the champion. Too many times, they just don't go with the organic growth and follow what the fans want. And it's a delicate balance. I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but this is a great example of it where fans know, and there's a confidence between the relationship we have with the company that you kind of know as you're watching, this is going to pay off for me. And I think that's been lost in translation. And you can go down with the Triple H era where he was, in 02, he did that reign of terror where he was beating people, and John Cena, that every pay-per-view would end with him as champion, despite fans desperate to want a change. It's one of those things where they became, and maybe we're wrong here, because they eventually became this multi-billion-dollar company that's bigger than ever. And despite TV ratings being much bigger here, they are quadruple the company, if not bigger than quadruple the company they are now. In 2023, they are an absolute monster. So that strategy has worked. But I'm saying from a perspective and as far as content goes, there's nothing better than what we're watching here as far as WWF goes. This is the peak of it, in my opinion. And I know we're blinded by nostalgia. The word's right on the show, shot nostalgia. We're blinded by that at times, but it's been so amazing to watch this through the eyes all these years later and enjoying the content for a second time because of the consistency that makes sense in the main storylines and also just the follow through on so many things. It's so beautiful. But yeah, my match of the night, Steve Austin versus Ken Stramach. But the lights are coming on the bar. We got to close the tab, get our weekend started here, and say goodbye for the week.
Closing the tab.
All right, here's our final wrap up as we close the tab. Next week's show will be episode 16 of season 3, May 17th, 2023. We'll be covering the September 21st Raw, WWF breakdown, and September 28th Raw. Mike Belcaster will be back with me. We'll be covering the triple threat match for the WWF Championship, Kane versus Taker versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. Going to be a great night as we approach the tail end. We're in the autumn of WWF 1998. Believe it or not, this season has flown by. 15 weeks at this point, and we're approaching the next season here as we get ready for Smoky Mountain Wrestling for that short season. And without fail, we're going to be announcing what season 5 will be very, very soon. Hope you guys are going to be looking forward to it. I think you will not be disappointed. I think our most popular season that we've had thus far was season 1, and this will be something that is very, very similar to that. So that's another hint I can drop for you guys. So I'm really hoping that you guys are going to be excited for that. But stay on the ride with us. This has been so much fun. I appreciate all the positive feedback. And also shout out to Victory Pro Wrestling for allowing myself to have the Turnbuckle Tavern table there. Also for allowing Remarkable Wrestling for having the table there to hype up the new school in St. James. And if you guys are interested in training to become a wrestler, make sure you go to remarkablewrestling.com. Also go at remarkable_wrestling on Instagram to get more information. How you can be trained. Only $150 a month. If you want to be a manager, a referee, a valet, a professional wrestler, you want to have any part in the business, learn from the best, and dare to be remarkable. But that's all we got for you for this week. We'll see you guys next week for the coverage of WWF Breakdown. And my good friend Mike Belcaster will be back with me talking about all things nostalgia-based from WWF 1998. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, we'll see you later.